morning, it's a limited number of tests. We are seeing some roadwork delays on I-55 in both directions between River Road and Blodgett. Farther south on I-55, roadwork gets underway today in Grundy County around Reed Road. Reagan Tollway in both directions. In the Aurora Toll Plaza and 59, two right lanes are blocked. That's traffic. I'm Jim Telemonte. On AM 560, The Answer.
At 7:38, Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. From our 1 hour heating and air conditioning weather center, cloudy, a couple of showers by the afternoon, high 63, a rain and a thunderstorm scheduled for the overnight, low 51. 38 degrees officially at O'Hare. Your next news update at 8, breaking news as it happens. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. President Trump over the weekend asked at one of the task force briefings about mail-in voting, something Joe Biden has suggested we need to consider. States should start to be making preparations for mail-in voting, having an all-mail-in election in November. President Trump was asked about that, and also sort of in the context of the Wisconsin primary election, which was in doubt over the last 72 hours, no longer in doubt. It's going to happen tomorrow. Oh, yeah. And, boy, Democrats are none too happy with Governor Evers about that. The mayor of Racine, Corey Mason, there's this enormous conflict between what we need to do in a democracy in the midst of a pandemic. You can't have a stay-at-home order, but then tell millions of people to go stand in line and congregate near one another across the state. Having an election in the middle of a stay-at-home order makes no sense. It did not have to be this way. Well, I know, but that was Evers' choice. President Trump on Wisconsin and the larger concept of mail-in balloting only for elections.
Why did he do this 2 weeks ago? All of a sudden, all of a sudden an election which is taking place very soon gets delayed. Now, I just endorsed him today, and it was a very strong endorsement. His polls, he's gone very high up. And all of a sudden, the governor comes out, the Democrat governor, by the way, comes out and says, oh, we're going to move this election. So I don't know. I hope you're right.
But do you think every state in this country should be prepared for mail-in voting?
No,
in case we're in a
because I
situation?
think a lot of people cheat with mail-in voting. I think people should vote with ID, voter ID. I think voter ID is very important. And the reason they don't want voter ID is because they intend to cheat. When you get something, when you buy something, you look at your cards and credit cards and different cards. You have your picture on many of them, not all of them, but on many of them. You should have a picture on your for voting. It should be called voter ID. They should have that. And it shouldn't be mail-in, it shouldn't be mail-in voting. It should be you go to a booth and you proudly display yourself. You don't send it in the mail where people pick up all sorts of bad things can happen by the time they sign that, if they sign that, by the time it gets in and is tabulated. No, it shouldn't be mailed in. You should vote at the booth and you should have voter ID.
Federal judge, again, extended the deadline by 1 day to request an absentee ballot this last week and is allowing 6 additional days after tomorrow to return them, but did not acquiesce to the request for postponement. Well, this Gouda got a lot better for Wisconsin. Did you see what I did there? Thanks very much. Scott Walker, he is the former governor of Wisconsin. We know him well. He's also now the president-elect of Young America's Foundation. Governor Walker, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, Trump has a point with respect to Governor Evers, doesn't he? I mean, DeWine postponed his election. Other states postponed their election weeks ago. He could have postponed this election much earlier rather than creating this chaos in the last few days if he had had more foresight.
Well, unfortunately, this is a pattern here. You know, it's a lack of leadership when you kind of originally Governor Evers said, let's go ahead, just keep there, no need to change it. Then he got a little bit of pressure, and he said, well, we should mail out ballots to everybody. And then in the last day or so, a couple days, he said, oh, no, I'm going to call a special session to move it. The problem isn't just the politics of this, which should be apparent, but on top of that, you've got not only a statewide election for the president, meaning a primary for both Republican and Democrats, a statewide election for the state Supreme Court, but you've also got all these local officials, all these mayors and city councils and county boards and others. And in Wisconsin, many of these local elected officials take office within weeks of the election. And so you'd have a problem. So you delayed it by a month, unless you change the law. Suddenly now for a month or a little bit less than a month, you might have an elected official who legally isn't in office anymore because their term's up. They should have handled this literally weeks ago. They could have done that in a way that said that everything got delayed, plus the term got delayed for a few months or a few weeks. Somebody obviously would have tried to challenge that, but I don't think any court would have said that was unreasonable. But there was no leadership.
Yeah. How is this going to work then tomorrow? Wisconsin National Guard is called up to round the polling places?
Yeah, they're there in support, although I saw, for example, Milwaukee, the largest city in Wisconsin, had people already being able to drive up. I think not everyone, but many of the locations are going to try and do a deal so that people can, certain key locations can drive up. They'll have ballots, envelopes to seal them in, just like you would an absentee ballot, and collect them right there and put them in on site, but do it outside so that people don't have to come into polling places.
How long will that take?
I know that's.
I mean, the
it'll
lines
be
is going to
crazy.
be. Yeah, right.
The only good part about this is, and I started because I could just unfortunately foresee where this was headed. I started weeks ago actively promoting it. In Wisconsin, you can get an absentee ballot. You don't have to be gone. You just have to request it. You still have to it still requires what the president just talked about, something I signed into law, a photo ID. But you can do it not only in person, you can actually take a picture, download it, and request a absentee ballot along with a photo ID online. And so we had a massive effort to try and get people to do that. It's up, I think, if I remember right, about threefold from where it was in the last election in terms of absentee ballots. So hopefully most of us, myself, my wife, my kids who are adults, my mother, my brother, all of our family, and most of the people we know have already voted absentee. So hopefully that mitigates most of the people in the state of Wisconsin having to show up.
The politics of this, you can't escape that. The effort, the calling of a special session, this was a way for him to try to blame shift. I'm talking about Governor Evers, right? Blame shift and say, oh, no, it's Republicans who won't go along with postponing it. It's their fault.
Oh, without a doubt. There are even many in the Capitol complaining that they thought that this was even worse politics, that originally when they thought it was going to affect more rural areas, and when they thought there was a likelihood that most Republicans are typically want to vote in person and aren't real keen on absentee ballots. Remember, weeks ago, the Republican-leaning counties, the suburbs of Milwaukee, maybe a third of the people were voting absentee as compared to last year's 2019 spring election. Big counties like Dane County, where the state capital is at, Madison, Milwaukee County, Kenosha County had over 50%. So if you're cynical and you look at it and you say, oh, okay, well, let's keep the election like it is. Now suddenly, city of Milwaukee, which normally has about 130 polling places, I think is consolidated down to just 5. And as I mentioned, they're already doing the drive-through yesterday. Suddenly, I think the governor got pressure saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe this isn't a good idea. Bottom line is they should have worked this out weeks ago. They could have done it in a reasonable way that extended these local government terms and still had a safe election process.
And we heard some suggestion that some of the early returns from Milwaukee County and the Madison area, which is sort of base camp for the Democrats, weren't what they wanted them to be, particularly as it relates to the Supreme Court race that President Trump mentioned. And that was also influencing Evers' oscillation on whether or not to hold the election tomorrow.
Well, yeah, and this has just been a total mess. You add into the fact that long before coronavirus, there was an opening, a vacancy created by former Congressman Sean Duffy announcing his departure from Congress. In northern Wisconsin, where the president does well, same thing. The current governor could have put that ballot on the same time as the spring election, but because that is a not only increasingly Republican area, because it's an area that does exceptionally well for the president of late. Again, a lot of people in the state capitol thought the governor just pushed that back to a different date so it wouldn't gin up turnout for a conservative like Justice Kelly. It's just a mess, and it's what happens when there's a failure to communicate and a failure of leadership. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing in Wisconsin right now.
We know all too well what failure of leadership looks like in Illinois. Our governor is.
In fact, I heard the president talking about that.
Yes,
yesterday.
yeah. We got a shout out, and always for the wrong reasons as usual. But the governor, or our governor, talking about how there needed to be a national plan. There needs to be a plan of action. What about, as somebody who was a two-term governor of Wisconsin, I'm looking at the CDC website, and right there in state and local government planning, they have Preparing for a Pandemic Influenza, a primer for governors and senior state officials, with details about best practices and supplies and so on and so forth. So it's not like that these documents don't exist, just as reporting about pandemics and the prospect of pandemics go back 30 years at least, with multiple administrations, multiple Congresses. So it seems to me that it's a few, thankfully, but there are a lot of governors and some mayors, some governors, I should say, and some mayors that are really blame shifting and trying to divert people's attention away from all the resources that were at their disposal, just like anybody else.
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily a partisan in this case. I mean, I think there are a number of governors, a number of mayors who step up and just say, let's just get it done. I remember a decade plus ago when I was running for governor, I had sat down with people like Jeb Bush, for example, who obviously from Florida had gone through a number of hurricanes. And we talked. That was one of the most important things we talked about before I was governor, even when I was just running, was how do you prepare? Now, we didn't think we'd have any hurricanes, thankfully, in Wisconsin.
Right.
The Great Lakes are great, but they're not that big. But we knew that there'd be tornadoes and floods, and there's other sorts of tragedies out there. And you just got to toughen up, and you got to have a plan, and you got to bring your team together. And probably one of the most important things that I've seen some do well and others fail miserably at is you've got to communicate. Forget about shifting blame. There's enough to worry about that later. I mean, who would have known, unless you're people like me and probably many of your listeners and listened to the facts, but that the media is now realizing George W. Bush actually gave a speech about this years ago,
right,
saying we got to be ready, and everybody ignored it. And Obama and Biden depleted the supplies that the federal government had that Bush and others were trying to do. But the bottom line in a situation like this, forget about blame. You got to work together, not just different levels of government, public and private sector. And you got to communicate. You got to tell people not only what you're doing, but why you're doing it. People have failed to do that all over the country.
So is Wisconsin prepared? Do you have enough PPEs and ventilators and all of that?
Yeah,
to your knowledge,
there obviously is concern if you got to the worst case scenario, but they're in relatively good shape. And people have even been forewarned, for example, in northern Wisconsin, where there's a lot of folks who have vacation homes, not only from southern Wisconsin, but obviously from the Chicago area, not to go to parts of the state where there aren't major healthcare systems, because the last thing you want is a number of people getting infected and not having the capacity to handle it. But I think not only in Wisconsin, but in the Midwest, if you tell us why things are happening, forget about pointing blame. Just say, okay, we need to do these things because here's why. I think most of us in the Midwest follow the rules if we understand what's going on, but don't just dictate it to us. Don't just tell us these things are going to happen because that person's in charge. Tell us why. And I think in the Midwest in particular, we'll do the right thing.
He is Governor Scott Walker, 45th governor of Wisconsin, now the president-elect of Young America's Foundation. Scott, thanks for joining us, and good luck with the election tomorrow.
Thank you. Be well.
Thanks, you too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them. right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Transferring paper files to digital used to be complicated and expensive. Data and document capture had many IT layers involved. It was expensive, time-consuming, and labor-intensive. Not anymore, thanks to the Alaris Infuse Smart Connected Scanning Solution from Kodak Alaris and IDT. The Alaris Infuse solution makes data and document capture easy, and it's powered by Capsys Capture Online. Within a matter of minutes,